everyone, for today's portrait photo shoot, we're going to be comparing the camera of the iPhone 14 Pro to my Pro camera. So I'm going to be using the Sony A7IV, which is a full frame mirrorless camera, and I have a few different prime lenses to match the cameras of the iPhone 14 Pro. So let's go. The first comparison we're going to be doing is with the ultra wide iPhone lens, which is about 13 millimeters. So I have my GM 14mm f1.8 that we'll be using as our Pro lens, Pro camera comparison. And I picked this spot right here because with the wide angle lens, I really want to get some of that color up there. And I also love the color, like the neutral color of the building as well. And then can we try one if you kind of like kick your leg out to the side a little? Yeah, that's so cool. To be able to compare images that have a similar look, I've decided to step down the aperture of my camera to match what it looks like on iPhone. For my style of photography, I normally love to shoot wide open to create super dreamy looking photos, but today I'm going to be shooting with higher apertures on my camera in order to make the side-by-side photos we're looking at match, so they're easier to compare. 2.8 for the wide angle. I think that looks good. While iPhone mentions, for example, how the main camera uses an aperture of f1.78, the aperture value on a phone is relative to crop factor. So in full frame equivalent, these camera lenses are more along the lines of f13 for the ultra wide, about f6 for the standard camera, and around f24 for the telephoto lens. I've decided to play it by eye during our photo shoot to match the aperture to the iPhone shot, and for the 14mm lens, I decided to go with f2.8. For this comparison, I love the way both the camera and iPhone shot turned out. Also, how fun is it taking photos with a ridiculously wide angle lens like this? Next up, we're going to be using the main lens of the iPhone 14 Pro, which is the equivalent of 24mm. So for our comparison, I have the GM 24mm f1.4 lens. 1, 2, 3. That's cool if maybe you could cross your arms in front of you. Yeah. Yes. 1, 2, 3. Something I mentioned in my iPhone 14 Pro review video, which I'll leave linked in the description if you want to watch, is that I'm not the biggest fan of the over-processed look of the photos when you shoot JPEG straight out of camera. And this is the way I shoot with phones 99% of the time for ease and convenience. I find that sometimes the sharpening can be a bit overdone, and the HDR effect, while it looks good for certain situations, other times can look overdone or unnatural. Having an option to turn HDR on or off in the future would be a nice firmware update. So we're moving on to the 24mm now, and I'm going to get some very similar shots. I think at f4 we have the bokeh looking very similar to the iPhone photos. In my last year of using phones to take random daily photos or behind the scenes, I have only switched over to RAW a couple of times for special occasions when I didn't already have my camera with me. In saying that, if you are someone who is using your phone as your main camera, I would highly recommend to shoot in RAW as the files are absolutely beautiful. A RAW file has more information in the tones and colors, and in the case of iPhone, you are getting a less processed image that doesn't have HDR built in or over sharpening. You can see how beautiful these iPhone 14 Pro RAW files are when you look at them side by side to my Sony A7IV files. The files look so sharp with lots of details, and once you're looking at the full edited image, you really can't tell them apart that easily. So next up, we're at this location. I love the colors here. I'm really excited to shoot some pictures. We're going to do 2x zoom, which is digital zoom, and it's about 48mm equivalent for the iPhone. So for my Pro camera, I'm going to be using my Zeiss 50mm f1.4 lens. So iPhone photos first, in RAW. I'll start with a full body shot here. This is so cute. Oh my gosh. I'll crop out the number of the house though. So far, the iPhone and camera have been pretty even, but now when we're using the 2x and 3x lenses is where the camera starts to pull ahead. One of the main things to look at is the file resolution. The standard camera creates 48 megapixel RAW files compared to all the other iPhone lenses, including ultra-wide and telephoto, which only produces 12 megapixel RAW files. It's also worth mentioning that the JPEG files from the main camera are also only 12 megapixels, so you can only access these 48 megapixel files by shooting in RAW. When using a DSLR or mirrorless camera, the lens you choose to shoot with doesn't change change the resolution of your files. Something else I prefer about using a camera is that even with a higher aperture of f4, the background has a smooth transition between in focus to out of focus, compared to the iPhone photo where that transition looks a lot harsher, or in these photos with the 2x lens, there isn't much bokeh at all. There are lots of advantages to shooting with either a phone or a camera. For example, if taking photos is your hobby or you want to get into photography as a hobby but can't afford a camera, then investing into a phone, which you already need for phone purposes, but making sure you get one with a good camera can be a great option to start practicing taking photos. With a phone, you can still practice composition, storytelling, learning how to work with lighting, and it's a good way to start using your creative photography muscles. If you want to buy a small, compact, or point-and-shoot camera for traveling, for example, you might want to consider if you should just get a phone with a good camera instead. Chances are when you're traveling, you'll always have your phone with you, while even a compact camera, you'll have times when you end up leaving it behind in your hotel room. On the other hand, a camera has the advantage if you want to pursue photography professionally or as a hobby. While you can get similar results with RAW files on a phone, a camera is much more ergonomic, faster to shoot with, you have lens options for different scenarios, it's got better low light capabilities, better resolution, and more creative control. Next up, we're going to test out the 3x optical zoom of the iPhone 14 Pro, which is the full frame equivalent of about 77mm. So for my Pro comparison, it's not exactly the same, but it's as close as I can get. It's the GM 85mm f1.4 lens. Now that we don't have as much light to work with is, again, where the camera wins for me, as it's easier to photograph movement and take control of my camera settings to achieve the photos I want. I think throughout the comparisons today, the iPhone 14 Pro held its own and did a great job. My favorite photos were probably the ultra-wide shots we got at the beginning, and I think the iPhone is the strongest and the highest quality when you're using the 48 megapixel RAW files with the main camera. Let me know what you think in the comments, and if you'd like to see a comparison like this for the Google Pixel 7 Pro versus my camera as well. I'm going to shoot at f5.6 for the 85mm, so I do have to bump up my ISO quite high. I'm at 2,500, but I think that should give us a similar looking photo. For some reason, the iPhone kept wanting to overexpose my telephoto shot, probably because the background was quite dark, but I think it looks better when it's a little underexposed. I normally like to bring down my exposure when I'm shooting for this reason. Luckily, with the RAW file, I was able to bring the exposure down with editing to make it match the camera photo a little better. And yet again, when looking at the full edited photo, it is quite difficult to tell them apart. So that is all I have for today's video. Let me know in the comments what you think of these comparisons and which ones are your favorite photos. But as always, thank you so much for watching. I make new videos every single week, so I will see you all next time. Bye!